has a lot of history behind it, actually, but it stems from one particular story that my mother told me about. She's an art professor, a retired art professor, and she told me about another art professor who said this. His name is Walter Nottingham, and he said this, that if we don't have any boundaries, then we spend 90% of our time thinking about what to do and 10% of our time actually doing anything with it. Whereas if we have boundaries, if we have restrictions, then we spend 10% of our time thinking about what to do and 90% of our time doing it, which makes complete sense to me, especially when we're at this keyboard with 88 keys. It feels like this blank canvas. Where do we start? But if we give ourselves, if we give our students boundaries, it makes it that much easier for them. So then one more quote to really nail this home for good is from Leonardo da Vinci. He says this: art lives from constraints and dies from freedom. So he even agrees with this whole idea and concept of boundaries or constraints. So now you may be asking, why 3? Because I have this 3, 2, 1. There we go. I've got them right there. Why? Oh, I got to do the opposite one. Why 3 boundaries? Well, we all know that 3 is a pretty good number. There's the 3 bears. There's the 3 little pigs. There's 3 Olympic medals. So 3 is a good number. In fact, it's the smallest number we need to create a pattern. It's the perfect combination of brevity and rhythm. So that's why I focus on the number 3 within this challenge. And let's talk a little bit more about the number 2. Why 2? Well, if you've been hanging around me or reading blogs or around my Facebook page, you'll know that I'm a big, huge fan of James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. And he says it takes all of 2 minutes to establish a habit. Let me read a quote from him. A new habit should not feel like a challenge. The actions that follow can be challenging, but the first 2 minutes should be easy. What you want is a gateway habit that naturally leads you down a more productive path. So that's what I like about the number 2. It's like, oh, I can do anything for 2 minutes. Really, it's not that hard. And then the number 1, well, okay, that was kind of a stretch, but it just fits so well with 3, 2, 1. The number 1, do this 1 time every day or every time you practice. So that's why it's called the 3, 2, 1 challenge. Now, before you jump into this challenge, this is why I wanted to host this Facebook live stream, because I want to explain a little bit more about how I go about it myself with my students. And the very first thing I want my students to be able to do is to feel comfortable with changing some of the things that they're playing already with their current repertoire. So if I have a student who's playing a really pretty simple song, it's a beginner, they master that, I'll say, well, I wonder how you could change that. And they may look at me like, I don't know. So then I might do and ask them to follow me. I'm not going to explain it. I'll just have them echo what I did. And then I'll have them talk about, what did you just do? Oh, I just played 2 E's instead of 1. So you change that. You added something to it. Now, change or add, I like to use those 2 verbs. So I could change it now. What did I do here? Again, I would ask my students to echo me and then describe to me what was changed. So I want my students to get used to that idea of being able to change what's familiar with them already in their current repertoire. And then you can have fun helping them master that all-time favorite chord progression. You've heard it before. I call it the heart and soul pattern, but I want my students to be able to play that inside and out. Most of them, again, ask to play that. So they learn that as well, and we learn it by ear. So these are all really good strategies, and they're not even realizing it, but they're learning how to play by ear. They're recognizing chords and playing chord shapes, and it really isn't all that hard because they don't have to read a lot of it. And then once they get really good at this chord progression, I start adding numbers to those chords and chord symbols. So the C chord, the A minor, or A small m, the F, and the G. And then also numbers. C is number 1 in the key of C, A is 6, and F is 4, and G is 5. So then they start really understanding those numbers and the relationship between chords. So those are all the preparatory steps that I take before we dive into this 3-2-1 challenge. So I hope that's helpful, because I think it's really important for students to first feel comfortable just doing those things, and then they can jump into more of what's written in this resource, the 3-2-1 challenge. So I want to show you what I have here. This is the level 1 sheet from this resource, and you'll see on this page there's a row of chord progressions, there's a row for keys, and there's this line with a pattern. And what's really important is I'll probably play that pattern for my students first and echo it for me, but I also like them to read the pattern. But I want to make sure that their eyes are looking only at the place they need, so I love to use little Post-its. So I'll do something like that, and I'll say, okay, can you play this for me? And they will, and then I want them to recognize something. I think this is a really important step as well, and that's when I like to pull out my can carriers. Some of you may know that I like to repurpose all kinds of crazy things. I am a fan of craft beer, and so this is a can carrier for beer right there, yes. And then, lo and behold, my half and half bottles, they're the little lids fit nicely in there. And then these are all Avery templates that I plugged in here. Avery has all these cool stickers. And so I've printed all these things out. But what I want students to understand is that a chord always has 3 parts. And chord, I'm talking about a triad here, oopsie. And those 3 parts are called a root, a third, and a fifth. And that's really important to understand, because you can be doing so many different things with these different chord tones within the 3-2-1 challenge. And then on my little lids here, I've got C, E, G. So they understand, oh, C's the root, E's the third, G's the fifth. It's very clear in their mind. And then what the other learning moment that I like about this is on the other side, on the inside of this lid, I've changed the E to an E flat. Oops, I don't know if you can see that, sorry. I'll put it up in the camera. So I've got a little E flat there. It's a really neat learning moment, because it's really tempting to spell that C chord, C, D flat, D sharp, sorry, G, and no. Remember, it has to be some kind of form of C, E, and G. We have to modify those pitches. So it's a great learning moment for that too. So when they look at this first pattern, I call it the share it pattern, they can recognize, oh, I'm playing the root and the fifth in my left hand, and the root and the third in my right hand. And then it's really easier to move that to those other chords. And on this 3-2-1 challenge, all the chord progressions are listed with numbers, and I use national numbers. I'm not using Roman numerals, and I did that on purpose. Number 1, first of all, because it fits nicer in my little space right here, but also these numbers make sense to students pretty easily, and they happen a lot, especially if someone's going to play and be a church musician. They're going to have to know national numbers sooner or later. So it's a good way to expose them to all of that. Now, I do want to stop and just talk about why I chose these 3 boundaries. This is a boundary sheet, and there are 3 boundaries that your students are going to use. A pattern that I've written out here, that's usually a hip pattern that's inspired by pop music. A key, well, you can kind of figure out why key would be a good boundary, because students are going to play in a lot of different keys, and this is a great way to have them explore new keys. And then I think the most important boundary, I know the most important boundary of all, is chord progressions. Now, students may know their chords, but I've heard enough compositions and judged enough composition contests that it's evident that students don't always know how chords work together and how they function. And so all of these chord progressions are borrowed from all those hot tunes that people hear on the radio. These chord progressions work. They're magic. They work. Why not share them with your students, learn them yourself, so that you can sound pretty good pretty easily. So that's the reason why I chose those 3 boundaries. All right, so That's the point of all of this, is choose 3 boundaries, and one of those boundaries has to be a chord progression. And by level 4, some of the chord progressions are getting pretty advanced. So I don't see any questions yet, so I'm going to keep going. Thanks for joining me, those of you who joined me. Let me know if you've got any questions. What I want to make sure that I show you is a couple of things that you can enjoy doing with your students with this 3-2-1 challenge. Now, you may also know that I'm a big tissue box fan, and so I put my numbers on here, and you don't have to do that. It's really not necessary, but I also did put labels, and these are included in the resource. So every tissue box has a key, a chord progression, and a pattern. And then if your students don't know what to choose for their boundaries, they can just choose one out of the box. So that's going to be, they're going to use the Passett pattern, and they're going to use the 1, 6 minor, 4, 5 chord progression. And what key are they going to use? They're going to use the key of C. I always recommend starting in the key of C and then branching out and trying things in other keys as well. So that's a way that you can help them choose boundaries. A lot of times I just have them go down the page. We don't do a lot of fancy selecting, but sometimes it's kind of fun to do that as well. And I have another little sample here of just smaller boxes where I did that. And I forgot to grab a popsicle stick, but you could also just put popsicle sticks with all the boundaries in each of these and then just have them pull one of those out. So kind of up to you how fun you want to make it. Or you can use one of those favorite apps, the favorite app of all time, which I believe Anna Fagan reminded me of or showed me the first time, that it's called Decide Now. And you can make wheels with all of these boundaries in there as well. It's a great way to let chance decide something for your students. And it makes them feel a little bit more in control. You are not making all the decisions. Either an app is, or chance is making the decision for them. All right. One other thing, if you want to have students review how to spell chords, maybe you've noticed that I posted these on my page. I got these at Target. I don't know if there's any left, but I would go run out and get some. So I added colored masking tape, and then you could ask students to just spell a chord. I just did this with a high school student. She was playing in the key of A flat. She's playing a new pop piece in A flat. So I said, well, what would be the A flat major chord? And what's really nice is that I like them to see once if they can spell it and then play it. And then they can use their ears to decide if they spelled it right or if they did something wrong. So I like to use those spinners. I also have another one with chord symbols, and then they have to spell the correct chord. This is a great one, I think, for explaining what diatonic chords are. These are all the diatonic chords in the key of C. Now I added one extra one because there was one extra side on my spinner, so I got a C minor. But the point being that word diatonic can be mysterious to some students, so that's why I include that there. All right, I just want to make sure that I included everything. I want to show you one really cool app. I am not good at hearing chord progressions and recognizing them. I will just tell you I could really use some help on that. So I've been practicing this one on my own. But this is called chord. I better make sure it's Toned Ear. Sorry, it's called Toned Ear, and it's free if you play it on your computer. But if you want the app for your mobile device, then you're going to have to purchase it. And they have lots of different drills, but one of the things they have is a chord progression drill. And there's not very many apps out there that have that. So if I click this,